Right. I'm going to request you to stay with us, and we're getting ready for the next panel. I want to just lay the ground here. The global energy demand, as most of our audience would be aware, has fallen by 6% in 2020, and the renewable energy demand is up by 1%. So what does this trend mean for the energy industry, and how can the energy sector drive the post-crisis recovery? That's what we'll discuss in this session. Let me introduce you to the panelists right away. His Royal Highness, of course, Prince Abdulaziz bin Salman Al-Saud is with us. Mukesh Ambani, Chairman of Reliance Industries Limited, with us from India. Marco Alverà, CEO Snam, Italy. Jean-Bernard Lévy, Chairman and CEO Global EDF Group, France. And Patrick Pouyanné, Chairman and CEO Total, France. Welcome to all of you. Your Excellency, if I could start with you again. The 2020 post-pandemic year has also seen a roller coaster ride for the oil industry, with the WTI crude falling into negative territory for the first time. And over the past 8 months, we saw the kind of rally that we saw. What has this meant for the oil industry, sir? And how have OPEC countries and other oil-producing nations worked to stabilize prices during the economic downturn? This is for you, sir.
Well, there is no better person to talk about this than Patrick. And I mean, Nasser, he's somewhere sitting here. Because I think we did a lot of work for them. So maybe Patrick will be the best person to KPI our performance and give us...
He's passing the question to you.
Can you just...
Yes, I was talking about the ups and downs that the oil industry has seen in the last 1 year, from the fall to the rally, and what this has meant for the oil economy in general, and how prices were stabilized during the economic downturn.
I think, the first lesson is that we have to be ready to face Russian mountains, I would say, That it's a commodity business, volatility. I know that each consuming country and each producing country is dreaming of a stable price, and His Highness is working hard with OPEC Plus to try. But the lessons of the last 5 years and even more this year is that it's not possible. That's possible because you have always, of course, this events of pandemic was absolutely unexpected, but matching supply and demand is just not possible. And you have, in fact, some fundamental trends on both sides, including on the demand, because, in fact, I think the big revolution that we face today in the energy world is not only on the supply side, it's more on the demand side, an evolution of the demand, and we need to think to the future in terms of what the customers, what the consumers want in terms of type of energy. They want reliable, affordable, and a clean energy. And that's why you mentioned your figure this year, less oil, but more renewables, And I think the fundamentals, so let's be ready to face. Let's stick to the fundamentals, and the fundamentals in commodity energy is a cost. We must invest in projects which have the lowest possible cost. The kingdom is blessed with the lowest possible cost for oil, but I cannot invest here, so I'm looking around, in the region. But I think it's the same in all these energy fields. It's the same for solar tomorrow. Where can we make efficient solar? It's the same for wind offshore. And that's a big lesson for me. And it's the way, by the way, that Total has gone weathering the storm with a portfolio which is resistant because we have a low break-even. So for me, that's the main lesson. Having said that, the other lesson is that, yes, we need to continue and accelerate in, I would say, this new energy world, because the planet has some fragility, and I think consciousness of it is there. Climate change is a reality, and I think it's also 2020, I think, a year where we've seen an acceleration of this momentum.
Sounds like a solid strategy to me. Mr. Ambani, what are the learnings from the pandemic for you, and how can the world's largest oil producers rethink their strategy based on the events of 2020?
Thank you, Palki. First and foremost, Your Royal Highness, greetings from India and greetings to my fellow panelists. I think that the first and the most important learning from the COVID-19 pandemic is that a global crisis like this, right, calls for cooperation among everyone. This pandemic has been the biggest disruptive development in modern times. It's not only a public health crisis, it's an economic crisis. It's also a humanitarian crisis. Lives and livelihoods of millions of people have been affected all over the world. And all of us have come together so that we can effectively deal with the above three challenges. And there is a lot of global cooperation. The second, the second learning is just faith in science and what we as a human race can do. Nobody had imagined that we will find a cure in less than 12 months for the vaccine. And we not only have one, but we have multiple vaccines from multiple countries that are now being rolled out. And what used to take 10 or 12 years, right, can now, like if we put our mind to it, we can achieve it. And the third learning that I see is really into the, if we show the same urgency and acceleration in achieving global recovery, right, I think that it can benefit the entire world and we can all aim for a better future. For the energy industry, yes, we have seen not only a drop in consumption, but we've also seen a drop in investments. And we have seen a volatility that we had not seen in the last many years. Just recently, we saw volatility in gas prices. And like my friend Patrick said, as a consuming country and as a consumer, I'd like to dream about stability in prices. And as a consumer, right, I think that is what the industry will have to provide. That energy for 5 out of the 8 billion people is still an essential requirement, and we expect this energy consumption to grow. And it is the responsibility of responsible countries as well as companies that are blessed with both technology and natural resources to meet the energy demands of the world. And I think that His Royal Highness said it very well in terms of saying that we have to deal with the energy of the young people around the globe, and we have to use their energy to make sure that we give them affordable, clean energy. And I think that what the pandemic has taught us on the demand side is that consumers will increasingly demand clean energy as they get used to more clean air, all the restrictions, and industry and countries with resources will have to step up and get motivated by what we have achieved in finding the vaccine, to find technological solutions to meet the needs of the people. So I think those were my learnings.
Right, sir. Mr. Alverà, Mr. Ambani spoke about disruption, and the world is talking about disruption and positive disruption and turning a situation around to find opportunities there. How can the energy sector be reinvented thus, and what kind of partnerships will drive this transition?
Well, thank you very much, first of all, for having me on this panel, Your Highness, and greetings to the co-panelists. Certainly, I am taking an optimistic view. We heard very eloquently from His Royal Highness the ability to really transform the industry, starting from the assets that we have. You need a vision and you need execution capability. And when the two combine, you can deliver. And the energy industry has the execution capability. The 70% of companies are changing. The ones who are not changing are being left behind. I see a model where we will not have a global agreement on CO2 pricing. What we achieved in Paris for the COP21, the so-called Paris Agreement, was a different geopolitical time. So we need to work on multilateral and bilateral agreements. You will have countries like Germany that need to get out of coal and get out of nuclear that will need to import a lot of green fuels. It can be blue hydrogen, it can be green hydrogen, it can be ammonia. And so you will have a new shift in the flows of energy. And going back to Germany, they have already started a very ambitious green energy diplomacy. And we have read about Japan coming here in Saudi Arabia to buy ammonia from the NEOM project. That's a very good example of how the future of energy will look like. The future will be a lot more circular, where you will go from hydrocarbons to renewable plastics, where you will go from solar energy into liquids or gases. To achieve that, the energy industry needs to collaborate a lot more. And the oil and gas industry is a good example where collaboration happens. In the utility business, historically, they were all monopolies. They don't have the same, always the same extent of sharing into projects. If you take the projects of Patrick around the world, there's hardly any project where Total is 100%. But if you take the projects of one of the Italian or Spanish utilities, they typically have 100% of the project. So I think NEOM is a good example where you have multiple players working together. We are involved as Snam through participation in De Nora that will be supplying with Thyssen the electrolyzers. But there's a lot of excitement because ultimately these low-cost renewable energies will also help companies in the hydrocarbon sector go circular and start blending hydrocarbons and molecules and electrons.
Mr. Lévy, there's a broad consensus that this transition and these recovery plans must be consistent with the Paris Agreement on climate change. Are we heading in the right direction in terms of walking the talk, and what potential challenges do you see along the way?
Well, thank you for giving me this opportunity and maybe to discuss the recovery plans that we are watching, especially in all through Europe. And first, I would like to send my very respectful greetings to His Royal Highness Mr. Abdulaziz. Very happy to see you on this screen. Also very happy to see the other panelists. Let me say first that despite a temporary break in the carbon emissions increase due to less energy consumption, I think everybody would agree that global warming continues. We've even seen record temperatures. At the same time, the crisis has demonstrated how important, how essential energy infrastructure is to economic resilience and social quality. So we need to continue to invest in energy assets. We need to assess the long-term safety, security, including cybersecurity. When we do these investments to build the resilient system in the long run, we've seen that global warming or health issues may have a disruptive, totally unexpected effect. Now we have the recovery plans. I think this is generally agreed. Recovery plans must be consistent with the Paris Accord on climate. I think it's a matter of common sense, but when we see the recovery plans with very big funds, we will expect that it will be a huge opportunity to accelerate previous trends in finding and implementing, executing, as the Martin was saying, a carbon efficient solution. We will, of course, include wind and solar energy, but also new hydro-based solutions.
Right, we do apologize for the poor network there, Mr. Lévy. Your Excellency, what kind of environment do you think governments need to create for oil majors to be able to achieve these goals of the mission of net zero and to be able to balance sustainability and growth?
Well, for everything there are enablers. I think people need to first be given the flexibility, like what we are doing with the circular carbon economy, people need to be given the flexibility to achieve emission reductions in every possible meaningful way that they can, so long as we all congregate. And that's why we, again, believe in CCE as the proper congregator of the willing parties to engage in an effort, serious effort, elaborate effort, to reduction of emissions. We should not be too facetious about from where we're getting it. I know Europe is going one way. Everybody should be left to do it his own way, so long as we all achieve, I think, what fundamentally Paris Agreement is calling for, which is reduction of emissions to make sure that we achieve the targets of the Paris Agreement. We as Saudi Arabia, as a believer, staunch believer of Paris Agreement, and we will do everything in our book as a government to enable our government companies to achieve also their targets, which, again, the difference between us as Saudi Arabia, and I think Patrick, this morning, he and I and Amin had spent some time discussing elaborately few things. We have a better case for reducing emissions and achieving our energy mix targets and actually producing and multiplying the effect and impact in our economy in a positive way than probably any other country in the world. With carbon sequestration, we can do a lot. With converting gas to nitrogen, we can do a lot. By the fuel displacement program, we can increase our exports of hydrocarbon by a lot. If we induce more efficiency, which we are, we can even export more. If we are to be compared as Aramco or SABIC amongst their own elites, I think both of them would stand tall, quite tall, when it comes to achieving targets. If you KPI, Aramco or SABIC achievements in terms of reduction of emissions, I leave that Patrick to say a few words on that, because or Mukesh also can share his thoughts on that. We stand to benefit, actually. We stand to benefit from Paris Agreement. And we stand, as long as we are not to avoid what has been agreed in Paris Agreement. So we will assure everybody in planet Earth, not only we are committed to Paris Agreement, we are actually going to make a lot of use of Paris Agreement, and it will be a good, successful agreement for us, because it would bring us lots of economic growth and lots of diversity.
Right. Mr. Ambani, the commitment is there, but the challenge is going to be dual for emerging markets. How can we stay on track to meet these environmental goals while also emerging from a health and economic crisis?
Well, I think that it is truly a challenge, but as we heard from this, they also provide great new opportunities. Let me just, for the emerging economies, like the opportunity is that the demand, like for the quality of life, right, the true demand for energy will double in the next 20 years. And our challenge is with clean energy and not necessarily renewable energy. I am very optimistic in terms of the new technologies that His Royal Highness talked about that can be then implemented across the world. And as long as we give affordable solutions, and we will meet the requirements. Our challenges are really interim price volatility. And for for countries like India, right, large price volatility as we import 80% of our energy in the short run have to be dealt with, and I'm sure that the oil producing countries and the energy producing countries will take that into account, at least in the coming years, to make sure that we have stability in the markets in the short term.
Mr. Pouyanné, your thoughts on balancing growth with green goals, and while the shift to renewable energy is evident, what, according to you, will dictate its pace and profitability?
Well, you know, it's like everything in energy. You know, in energy, you have to think long term. You know, when I'm entering in a new country to produce oil, it takes 10 years before to get some returns. I think people are asking renewables to be immediately profitable. No, it's a question of others' wills to believe in technology, lowering the cost curve, and really we make big improvements. Then it's a matter of scale. Obviously, I think we are able today to deploy very large scale renewable projects, exactly, and hydrogen is exactly what the kingdom can offer. So scale, cost, more projects, experience, and we will be able to make that profitable. You know, within Total, we have really decided this year, for me, it's I'm using the word transforming. We are considered an oil company. We will become a broad energy company. And in the next decade, the growth of Total, because we need to supply more energy. And let's be clear, the world needs more energy and less emissions. And this is the equation. People try to say we will need less energy. No, it's not true. More population, more energy, but less emissions. And in our company, this is exactly the strategy. More energy, we want to grow the company by 30%, but the growth will come from two pillars. One is renewables, and renewables profitable at 10% on equity, and it's possible. We have announced in the only year 2020, 10 gigawatts of projects. Of course, you don't need to do in the most mature country like the US, but if you go to India, we have been heavy investors in India, competing with Mukesh tomorrow, one of his friends. You can find markets where you can make it big, and as well in the region. So I think it's possible. The other pillars of the growth, by the way, is natural gas. We should not forget. I know it's considered as a fossil fuel, but we need the combination, the right combination for many emerging countries. Because we must also find solutions, not only for developed countries like European ones, which can afford expensive energy. We must have a solution for also the emerging countries. And there, the mix of natural gas and renewables is a possibility. This is exactly, again, the strategy we apply within my company at a large level. And the ambition is not to be known as Total, but Total Energies, you know, all energies. This is what we are becoming, and this is what we want to offer to the countries. Again, India is a perfect example. This year, we have invested $3 billion in natural gas and renewables. So renewables, again, yes, this is possible to make it as profitable as other energies, but first, we need to invest, and not asking these investments to deliver cash flows as mature energies.
So profitability is one, and then there's security of supply and efficiency, which are also challenges, would you say?
Yeah, of course, because renewables are offering something to countries, which is security of supply. I say it's local, you know, which is also a risk for the investors, you know, because you take a local risk when you invest in renewables, because it's for the local market as well, you know. My friend of EDF knows that well. For oil companies, new, you know. So, I mean, that's also something that we need to tackle. And the answer to that for a company like Total is to invest globally, to look to opportunities, to diversify the portfolio, you know. So my vision of what we want to become in 2030, we'll have invested in 100 gigawatts of growth capacity. This is the objective. And it will spread in probably 30 countries around the world, because it's also there something that we can bring as a broad energy company.
Indeed. Mr. Alverà, what role will sustainable finance play in this transition to renewable energy?
Thank you. Well, sustainable finance is changing everything in the sense that investments are becoming passive, so people are no longer picking stocks, they are betting on indices, and the rating agencies, I'm on the board of Standard & Poor, will be issuing ESG ratings. And so passive investors plus sustainable finance plus ESG ratings plus people like Larry Fink saying we will only invest in companies that meet some criteria mean that the gap between the companies that perform well, that are transforming, that are ESG compliant, and the companies that are stuck in an old business model, that gap will become huge, driving down the returns for the predictable projects that become more financeable. Snam, for instance, is now able to issue bonds at 0 coupon. So there's so much liquidity out there. We have the execution capability, and that's why we see a big opportunity to come into this part of the world, as well as into India. And really the paradigm change, as His Royal Highness just said, in the Paris Agreement, the talk was about how to finance the extra cost of reducing emissions. I think in 2021, in the COP26 that will be in Italy and in the UK, the equivalent of Paris, the talk is not so much as to how do we share the cost, but much more about the opportunity. Who will be the winners in the opportunity? And a lot of that is going to be driven by this huge shift in finance, becoming passive and becoming sustainable.
Right. I have more questions, but we're out of time. So I'm going to thank you all, gentlemen. You want to say something? Closing
Just
comments?
emphasizing one thing. Whatever we will be doing in Saudi Arabia would support emission reduction. So we're doing it willingly because the economic case for it is huge. When we convert to renewable and gas and save the liquids, as one example, huge amount of reduction will come as a result of this the transformative modus operandi that we will be changing, along with the new conversions will become more efficient. Plant and industries will be plugged with electricity instead of them fueling themselves. Desalination plants, for example, will go to an RO technology, which means plugging your desalination plant to electricity instead of them fueling themselves, and so on and so on. The case for us is there, and we will enjoy being also looked at as a reasonable and a good international citizen, because we're delivering, I would argue, probably much more than what many European countries will deliver in 2030.
The journalist in me would want answers from them, but we're out of time. So thank you very much, gentlemen. Thank you for sharing your thoughts and perspectives.